I heard everything, while they thought I was dying. My husband stood over my bed, whispering to his mistress how they'd finish me off, right after finalizing the changes to my will. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, but I remembered every word. And now that I'm awake, he has no idea what's coming. If you've ever felt powerless but dreamed of turning the tables, this story is for you. Tap that subscribe button, give this video a like, and share it with someone who believes justice should never come quietly. Because today, revenge has a heartbeat. Let's begin. Silence. That's what the world thought surrounded me. Machines hummed, monitors blinked, nurses whispered, but no one knew I could hear them. That I could feel everything. They called it a coma. I called it captivity. 3 months. That's how long I'd been lying here at West Haven Neurological Center, in a private suite tucked behind the ICU ward. According to the nurses' hushed conversations, the accident had been unfortunate but not unusual, a brake failure, late at night, alone on the road. I'd been driving home after a 14-hour emergency surgery. The irony would have made me laugh, if I'd been able to move my mouth. Instead, I listened. Day after day. Hour after hour. At first, the visitors were frequent, my parents, colleagues, even my former students. But as weeks passed, their numbers thinned. All except for one man who never failed to show up. Nathaniel Quinn. My husband of 12 years. The man I once believed would grow old with me. Who used to press coffee into my hands before dawn and walk barefoot with me across the chilled tiles of our kitchen. Now he sat beside my hospital bed each evening, planning my death. The first time I heard it, my heart monitor betrayed me. Just a spike, one errant beep, but enough to draw Nurse Mia's attention. She stepped in, checking my IVs and adjusting the oxygen tube while Nathaniel stood by with his practiced mask of concern. "She okay?" Mia had asked gently. "She's stable," he'd said, brushing a hand over my hair. "It's just hard seeing her like this." I stayed still. Completely still. Even as I registered the lie behind every syllable. When Mia left, his voice changed. 3 months, he whispered, checking his watch. "We'll move forward next week. Valerie already has the papers." Valerie Ames. His junior associate. I knew the name. I'd mentored her during her first externship at Nathaniel's firm. She was brilliant, ambitious, and clearly much more than his legal assistant now. I listened as he laid out the plan like a script. First, the paperwork. A revised will, signed under dubious but witnessed circumstances. My foundation funds redirected. My medical directives modified. Then, a complication. A heart failure. A fall. Something natural. Something clean. She wouldn't suffer, Nathaniel had murmured that night. It would be peaceful. You've seen how long these things drag out otherwise. And the longer she lies there, the more questions people start asking. He paused, then placed his hand on mine, the same hand that had once placed a ring on my finger beneath a sycamore tree in Tuscany. "I loved you, Alara. But this is mercy. Mercy." My fingers ached to curl into fists. My heart slammed against my ribs, screaming to be heard. But my body, my brilliant, traitorous body, refused to move. After he left, I wept without tears. Internally. Silently. For the woman I had been. For the years we'd shared. For the life I thought was real. That night, the weight of realization settled across me like a second paralysis. I wasn't just a patient. I was a target. A woman on the edge of being erased. But I was also a neurologist. And I understood the brain better than anyone. I knew that even within locked-in syndrome, some patients could learn to control involuntary muscles, blinks, even slow finger movement. The key was time. And patience. And above all, the will to survive. I would stay still. I would stay silent. But I would listen. And I would remember. Because while they thought I was dying, I was preparing to live. Not just to survive. But to make them wish I never woke up. The next time Valerie entered my hospital room, she was wearing red lipstick. The color burned against the sterile whites and grays of the hospital, like a threat wrapped in gloss. Her heels clicked across the linoleum as she approached my bed, pretending not to smirk. I kept my eyes half closed, my breathing shallow, my body the perfect imitation of oblivion. "She looks peaceful," Valerie said, her voice sugary smooth. "Almost like she's just sleeping." "She won't be much longer," Nathaniel replied. He stood beside her, arms crossed over his tailored coat, his face cold and composed. "The new paperwork's filed. Mia's shift ends at midnight. There's a gap between rounds. It'll look like a cardiac event." Valerie tilted her head. "No bruising. No suspicion. Just a tragic decline," he added. My vitals remained even, steady. Inside, my mind ran like wildfire. Cardiac event. Shift change. I logged every word like I once documented symptoms on a patient chart. My brain, once used for saving lives, was now my own weapon of preservation. What Nathaniel didn't know, what they didn't know, was that Mia, the night nurse, had been watching. I'd felt it, the subtle way she lingered during checks. The quiet way her eyes flicked from me to Nathaniel, then back again. She didn't speak much, but her silence felt like armor. And in a place filled with noise and pretense, that silence was something I could trust. After Valerie left that evening, Nathaniel remained. He paced the room, phone pressed to his ear. "We're moving too slow," he said to whoever was on the other end. "The foundation board is asking questions. They want to delay the transfer. We can't afford that." A pause. Then. "I don't care if it looks rushed. She's comatose. She can't object." A beat. "Once she's gone, the signatures won't matter." I felt a pulse of rage so hot it nearly made my fingers twitch. But I couldn't break the illusion. Not yet. The foundation. That was what he really wanted. Not the cars. Not even the houses. But the multimillion-dollar fund I'd built over a decade. A fund meant to support neurological research, ethical patient care, and scholarships for disadvantaged women in medicine. My life's work. And he was ready to burn it for profit. Valerie returned 2 nights later. This time, with a thin stack of folders. "It's done," she whispered. "The signatures are notarized. If anyone checks, it'll look legitimate. The board will vote next week. We just need her gone by then." "Tomorrow," Nathaniel said. "During shift change. Make it look natural. And make sure you're seen at the office, not here." She nodded. "We're monsters, aren't we?" He laughed quietly. "Only if we fail." That laugh. Cold. Unapologetic. Nathaniel, my husband, the man who once read poetry by candlelight and cried when my mother passed, was gone. Maybe he never existed. They left. And I was alone. Or so they thought. At 3:11 a.m., Mia returned for her round. As she adjusted my blanket, I felt the slightest shift, the softest press of paper into my palm. A folded note. She didn't speak. She didn't even pause. Just moved through the room like always and left without a glance. I waited until the cameras couldn't see, angled toward the monitors and not my hands. Then, with painstaking slowness, I moved my thumb. I unfolded the note under the sheets using a practice clench of my palm against my thigh. 4 words. I believe you. M. I didn't cry. I burned. With hope. With fury. With the first ember of revenge. Because now I wasn't alone. Now, I had an accomplice. Hope is a dangerous thing in a locked body. It makes you ache. It reminds you of everything you can't do, yet. But it also sparks something even more powerful, resolve. Mia's note was just 4 words, but it rewired everything. For the first time since the crash, I didn't feel like a patient. I felt like a player. Silent, invisible, and underestimated, but still in the game. Over the next week, I began to shift my strategy. I started cataloging not just what Nathaniel and Valerie said, but when they said it, how they moved, what they touched. I learned the rhythm of the hospital better than any nurse. When the janitor came. When the floors were mopped. When the cameras rotated. When the lights dimmed slightly for the night shift and when no one was watching. Mia changed her patterns too. Subtly. She took longer to change my linens. She adjusted the TV angle so the glare hit the security lens. She began humming, a different song each night. I knew she was signaling something, but I didn't know what until 3 nights later. That's when she whispered it. You're not the only one watching. She didn't say it to me directly. She said it while fiddling with the 4 bag, eyes focused ahead. But I caught every syllable. Someone else was noticing. Someone other than her. That same night, during her next check-in, she dropped another piece of paper, disguised as part of the vitals chart. I managed to shift my hand just enough to pull it beneath the blanket. It was a printout of an internal staff report, incident logs, to be exact. On it, I saw 2 flagged visits. Both from Nathaniel. Both marked outside authorized visiting hours. Both deleted by an unknown administrator. Someone had tried to erase the evidence. Mia had recovered the backup. The next day, Nathaniel arrived earlier than usual. His voice was tight, his footsteps sharper. He stood over me like he was searching for something, some tremor, some twitch. She's twitching, he told the nurse on duty. I think I saw her hand move. Muscle spasms are common, the nurse replied, her tone neutral. There's no sign of active consciousness. Then increase the sedative, he snapped. She's clearly agitated. That was the moment I knew, he was getting nervous. And a nervous predator is sloppy. By now, I could twitch the ring finger on my right hand. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I used it when Mia was in the room, always in response to her humming a specific song, Claire de Lune. It became our signal. The next afternoon, she wheeled in a mobile EEG unit. Standard procedure, she claimed. But I knew it wasn't scheduled. She positioned it, hooked up the leads, and tapped once on my wrist. Listen carefully, she whispered. Then she began speaking to the room as if narrating her procedure. Dr. Quinn, if you can hear me, I want you to try something. I'll ask you to imagine clenching your right hand. Not move it, just imagine it. That'll produce a pattern we can track on the EEG. If you can do that, we'll know you're in there. I focused every thought, every scrap of awareness, into the mental picture of clenching my fist. I visualized the tendons pulling, the skin folding over the knuckles, the heat of blood flow rushing through. Mia watched the monitor. There it is, she whispered under her breath. She's in there. It took everything in me not to break. Later that night, I heard Nathaniel on the phone. He was in the corridor outside the room, thinking I was too far to hear. She's showing signs of improvement, he hissed. They want to run more tests. That screws everything. We have to move now. A long pause. No, I'll handle it myself. He hung up. That was his mistake. You don't warn your victim when they've already become your hunter. The next morning, a new doctor appeared during rounds. Dr. Isaac Ching. A trauma neurologist I had worked with years ago during a fellowship in Boston. He wasn't on the staff roster. And yet, here he was. He adjusted my blanket with quiet precision and leaned in. Mia called me, he whispered, lips barely moving. We're watching. Don't move too fast. Let him come. He pressed a warm hand on my shoulder. A silent oath of allegiance. I wanted to cry. But instead, I imagined clenching that fist again. More allies. More eyes. More cracks in Nathaniel's plan. But I still had to wait. Wait for the moment where everything aligned. The paperwork. The sedatives. The camera gaps. The medical charts. The fake signatures. And the final, irreversible attempt. I was preparing my recovery like a surgical operation. Every variable. Every tool. Every risk. And I'd be ready to cut. Because they'd built a plan so perfect, they never saw the scalpel coming. It happened at 10:04 a.m. on a Thursday. That was the moment Nathaniel filed the final set of forged legal documents, transferring the last of our joint holdings into a survivorship trust under his name. The digital signature bore my name, Dr. Alara Quinn, but I never lifted a pen. Mia slipped me a printed copy of the document later that night, disguised between linen charts. The signature was a near-perfect match, but I spotted the error immediately. They'd used the old version of my last name, Quinn with a double N at the end. I had updated all my legal records 3 years ago when I reclaimed my birth spelling after publishing my paper on neuroplasticity. No one but someone skimming old records would have missed that. That mistake. That was my wedge. The next morning, Detective Riva Thorne entered my room posing as a visiting consultant. She wore blue scrubs, hair tucked under a standard surgical cap. She wheeled in a rolling laptop cart and positioned herself beside my bed. You blinked yesterday, she said softly, while pretending to read vitals. It was very slight. But it was deliberate. We've reviewed the tapes. Mia stood at the door, feigning routine chart updates. I'm going to ask again, Dr. Quinn, Riva whispered. Blink twice if you're conscious. I waited until the monitor beeped once. Then twice. I blinked. Once. Twice. She exhaled and then smiled with something between pity and awe. My God. You're really in there. She stood up, cleared her throat, and tapped a few keys on the laptop, giving the appearance of logging notes. Then she leaned closer again. I need your help building a timeline, she murmured. Anything you can give us, small finger movements, eye movements, we'll record. Don't worry. We're documenting everything. And from that point forward, I began speaking with my body. It started slow. The twitch of a knuckle to say, yes. A strange shoulder flex to say, no. The hospital neurologists, unaware of the full context, believed I was entering a rare, miraculous recovery. They scheduled MRIs. Scans. Evaluations. But Mia and Riva. They used every scan as an excuse to scan them back. They documented the times Nathaniel visited. They tracked Valerie's phone calls. They intercepted one of Nathaniel's emails to a private investigator asking for methods that wouldn't be questioned. The net was tightening. And he didn't even know it. That weekend, Riva obtained a warrant to search the contents of Nathaniel's secure home server. The court believed it was to verify medical power of attorney discrepancies. In truth, they were looking for something darker, the original draft of the new will, which had been signed after the date on the legal record. Forgery. Fraud. Intent to deceive. Add that to the digital footprint of Valerie's metadata on every signed document, and the prosecution was beginning to take shape. But the moment that changed everything happened 2 days later. Valerie slipped up. She visited me alone. No Nathaniel. No cameras. She wore a silk scarf over her coat and sat by my bed like an actress playing regret. "You really should have stayed asleep," she said. "It would have been cleaner." I didn't move. She leaned closer. "We gave you more than enough time, you know. Nate kept saying you might come back. But I think he just needed to believe it wouldn't be murder if you did." She smiled, bitterly. "I told him from the beginning, accidents are accidents. It's not like we pushed your car." There it was. A whisper of guilt. An unintended confession. Riva and Mia were watching from the room across the hall through a silent feed. Later, Riva would call it the tipping point. Enough to justify charges if needed. Enough to secure the wiretap for Nathaniel. But to me, it was personal. Because now I knew for certain, he'd been in on the crash from the beginning. It wasn't opportunism. It was premeditation. Later that night, Mia sat beside me, visibly shaken. "He sabotaged your brakes," she said, voice low. "They found tampering marks, confirmed by the mechanic. And guess who owns the garage?" I blinked 3 times. Rapidly. A full yes. Riva was building a case, one puzzle piece at a time. But I knew that puzzle better than anyone. Because I was the one they tried to erase. And now I was back. They'd stolen my name. My body. My silence. But the one thing they couldn't steal. The truth. And I was about to use it to tear their world apart. They thought they'd buried me beneath silence. But they forgot I was a scientist, and I understood pressure. And pressure, when contained long enough, doesn't just build. It explodes. By the end of that week, Mia had covertly installed a voice recorder behind the wall panel of my room. Every conversation Nathaniel and Valerie had near my bed, every whisper, every gloating admission, was now being catalogued and relayed directly to Detective Riva Thorne and the prosecutor's office. The evidence was mounting like floodwater behind a brittle dam. Nathaniel's routine became predictable. Morning visits with fake concern, subtle threats disguised as intimate musings, and afternoon calls in the corridor to finalize transfers. Valerie's confidence, on the other hand, had started to fray. She snapped at staff. She double-checked doors. She even started carrying a burner phone. They were crumbling. But they didn't know how much yet. That changed on a stormy Thursday afternoon. Thunder rolled overhead as Detective Thorne walked into my room in plain clothes, holding a beige folder in one hand and a black velvet pouch in the other. Mia locked the door behind her. Riva didn't waste time. "We've confirmed tampering on the brake line," she said. "Registered under a shell company that Nathaniel set up 3 months before your accident." She placed the pouch on the side table and opened it. Inside was my wedding ring. "We found this in a pawn box filed under Valerie Ames' name. She claimed she was holding it for you, in case of loss during medical care. But the timestamp shows it was pawned 4 days before the accident." I stared at the ring. A piece of myself I hadn't even noticed missing. Now a fingerprint on their crime. I blinked once. Then once more. Riva nodded. Time to prepare. Within 24 hours, a team of neurologists and trauma therapists, trusted colleagues from out of state, were flown in under the guise of a medical review. My medical chart was quietly duplicated and stored off-site. My room was outfitted with 2 hidden cameras and 1 embedded microphone in the ventilation. We were preparing for the final act. Nathaniel arrived that evening at his usual time. But this time, there was something different about him. He moved with more urgency. His eyes darted around the room. He closed the blinds. "I spoke to Dr. Aldridge," he said, referring to one of my attending physicians. "He says your vitals are showing changes." His hand hovered over mine. "Are you waking up, Elara?" I didn't move. "Because if you are," he whispered, "you should know, this was never personal. I just couldn't let everything go to waste." He smiled softly, almost tender. "Rest now. While you still can." I counted the seconds until he left the room. When he did, I blinked rapidly. Mia was watching from the monitoring station down the hall. Within minutes, Detective Thorne was on the phone with the district attorney. It was time to let them think they'd won. That night, Valerie logged into the Foundation's online banking system and made a final attempt to transfer $3.4 million to a Hong Kong account under an alias. But this time, the login triggered a silent alert. A sting had been authorized. The next morning, while sipping espresso in the hospital cafe, Valerie was arrested by federal agents posing as doctors. Nathaniel didn't know yet. At 2:17 p.m., I made my first public movement. Just a small one. I turned my head 2 inches to the left. Directly toward the camera. Deliberate. Obvious. Unmistakable. The attending physician was called in. Then another. Then Dr. Isaac Ching arrived, under the guise of reassessment, and called the entire neuro team to evaluate. It became a miracle recovery. One that the news media would later obsess over. But to me, it was a calculated step in a controlled plan. By the time Nathaniel arrived that evening, the nurses were buzzing. The blinds were up. The air was electric. I kept my eyes shut. Still faking it. Because I wanted him to believe it wasn't too late. That he could still end it. At 7:03 p.m., he stood beside me, speaking softly again. "If you're still in there," he whispered, "you know it's better this way." We were both miserable. "This ends it clean." I didn't blink. "Not yet." He leaned closer. "We had 12 good years. I'm sorry it had to end like this." The moment his fingers touched my foreline, the door burst open. Detective Thorne. 2 uniformed officers. Mia. Dr. Chang. Nathaniel froze like a deer in floodlights. "Elara Quinn," Riva said calmly, "you are no longer in medical custody. And you are no longer alone." I opened my eyes. Looked straight at him. And smiled. His face collapsed into pure, human terror. As they cuffed him, Mia stepped beside my bed and whispered. "They just walked into your operating room." I didn't reply. But in my mind, the scalpel had already cut deep. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in energy. A space carved from marble and wood, where truth often suffocated under procedure. But not today. Today, the silence I had survived in was no longer a prison, it was evidence. It was a weapon. And now, it was being heard. It took 6 months to get to trial. 6 months of depositions, forensic tracing, chain of custody arguments, and suppressed panic from Nathaniel's defense team. During that time, Valerie's deal unraveled like twine soaked in gasoline, fast and flammable. She flipped within 3 weeks of her arrest. Everything she knew, she told. Every detail, date, login, conversation, every whisper in my hospital room. She confessed. And she cried. But the court didn't care about her tears. They cared about proof. And we had plenty. Detective Riva Thorne had built the case like a cathedral. Precise. Imposing. Unshakable. With Mia's recordings, the altered medical files, Valerie's testimony, the financial records, the signed but outdated legal documents, and forensic evidence from the brake tampering, there was no more if. There was only how long he would go away. The trial opened with a bombshell, my voice. Not my presence. Not yet. Just the audio logs. The jurors heard Nathaniel's voice, recorded from beside my bed. I just need her gone. A clean end. It'll be painless. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. He flinched. His lawyer stood. Taken out of context. But the judge leaned forward. Context will come, counsel. Let's hear it. And so it came. Each day of testimony was a piece of the structure collapsing. First came the nurse testimonies. Then the hospital techs. Then Mia. Her calm, professional delivery stunned the court. I suspected Mr. Quinn was manipulating medical staff access. So I kept records. Times, visitors, vitals. I notified Dr. Chin, then Detective Thorne. Then came Valerie. Her voice shook, but her words did not. He said, if Alara woke up, everything would fall apart. The foundation. The money. His life. She paused. He said, he loved her once. But love wasn't enough anymore. Nathaniel sat stiffly beside his lawyer, jaw clenched so tight the veins pulsed at his temples. And then, it was my turn. When I entered the courtroom in my wheelchair, still regaining full strength from months of atrophy, there was a collective inhale. I wasn't weak. I wasn't broken. I was alive. I passed him slowly, letting him see me. Letting him feel what it meant to be haunted by the woman you buried but never quite managed to kill. I testified for 3 hours. I heard everything, I said. The click of his watch when he got nervous. The way he said "we" when planning my death. The way she, Valerie, started calling my foundation our ticket. I heard it all. I detailed every conversation, every touch, every phrase repeated night after night while I lay motionless. I described the brake failure. The altered medical directives. The bank transfers. The plan for a lethal 4 during the night shift. I was paralyzed, I said, but my mind was recording. The defense had no real cross-examination. Just floundering. They tried to claim the coma caused hallucinations. But the recordings backed me. The forensic timestamps backed me. The surveillance footage. The documents. The digital footprints. Silence doesn't forget. And I had been very silent. The closing arguments were swift. Prosecution, he built the perfect crime. But he forgot his victim was an expert in the brain. And her brain never stopped fighting. Defense, this was a breakdown of a marriage. A tragic miscommunication. Not murder. But the jury didn't buy it. They returned in 2 hours. Guilty. On all counts. Attempted murder. Fraud. Medical falsification. Conspiracy to commit homicide. The courtroom didn't cheer. But I felt something better than applause. I felt vindication. As they led Nathaniel away in cuffs, he turned to look at me. No longer the polished attorney. Just a man undone by the one thing he never expected. That the woman he tried to silence would use that silence to end him. After the trial, the world called me brave. They wrote headlines like "The Doctor Who Outsmarted Death," and "Wife Awakens to Dismantle Husband's Murder Plot." Strangers mailed letters of admiration, calling me a symbol of resilience. My face appeared in magazines and medical journals. But behind the sharp suits, controlled smiles, and perfectly lit interviews, I was still learning how to live with the aftermath. Because surviving isn't the same as healing. Nathaniel's sentence was final, life without parole. Valerie received a 15-year sentence with no possibility of early release. She didn't fight it. In her final courtroom statement, she said, "Alara was more human while paralyzed than we were fully conscious." But that didn't mean I could close the book. There was still the house, the one Nathaniel and I had built together. I couldn't stay there. Every corner was a memory wrapped in a lie. I moved out the same week he was sentenced. I left everything behind but three things: my medical books, my father's record player, and the photo of me and my parents at my white coat ceremony. The foundation, on the other hand, needed me. The board had offered to take everything off my hands. "Rest," they said. "Let us run it while you recover." But I couldn't. That foundation wasn't just mine, it was the version of me before the coma. The woman who believed she could save people. And after everything that happened, I needed to believe that again. So I returned, slowly. First as a consultant. Then as acting director. We changed the mission. The new focus: neurological trauma, patient advocacy, and fraud protection. We established a scholarship fund for whistleblower nurses. We created an investigative team that now partners with hospitals to detect internal fraud. Mia runs it. She declined all press requests. "Some of us fight better behind the curtain," she said with a smile. She visits me every Friday afternoon. We have tea. Sometimes we sit in silence. Comfortable, not trapped. Other times we talk about her wedding plans or new cases. She's become more than a nurse. More than a friend. She's my anchor to the quiet truth. Detective Reva Thorne, now promoted to lead investigator of medical fraud for the state, still checks in from time to time. She calls our case the one that rewrote everything. "You know they teach it now," she told me one afternoon. "At the academy. Your file. Your silence. The way you mapped them from a bed." I nodded. It wasn't heroism. It was survival. But the way you turn survival into strategy, that's the part they study. Still, outside of those circles, I walked differently through the world. I watched people closer. I noticed how often they avoided eye contact when lying. I listened for what wasn't said. Even in new relationships, professional or personal, I found myself mapping exit plans. It wasn't paranoia. It was instinct. I remember once, during a board meeting, our new CFO suggested we delegate final fund approvals to a smaller panel for efficiency. Everyone nodded. Smiled. But I said no. And I didn't explain why. Later, I found out he had links to one of Nathaniel's old shell companies. Old me would have given him the benefit of the doubt. New me. I had no room for chances. People say trauma makes you cold. I disagree. It makes you precise. It's not that I didn't want to trust again. I just knew that blind trust had almost ended me. And I would never trade comfort for risk again. One evening, I found myself standing in the same hospital corridor I had once been wheeled through, unconscious, my hand limp on M4 line that nearly became my execution cord. Now, I walked it upright, with my own steps. Slower than before, yes. But deliberate. There was a patient in room 409, a young woman, 22, in a coma after a skiing accident. Her mother had been reading poetry to her daily. I visited them once, quietly. Sat at the edge of the bed while the mother read Auden. Later, I took the woman's hand gently and whispered. I know it's dark. But if you're in there, keep listening. Don't stop listening. Because sometimes survival starts with just hearing. And remembering. And waiting for your moment. My moment had come and gone. But now I was helping others find theirs. One heartbeat at a time. It arrived in a plain white envelope, tucked between hospital reports and board meeting agendas. No return address. No stamp. Just my name written in familiar, angular handwriting. Alara. Even before I opened it, I knew who it was from. Nathaniel. Months had passed since the trial. He was locked away in the maximum security wing of a federal penitentiary in Oregon, far from the polished boardrooms and $1,000 suits he used to wear like armor. The news occasionally mentioned his name, an appeal denied, a co-conspirator's statement filed, but I never followed. I'd moved forward. Or so I thought. I stared at the envelope for 10 minutes before touching it. A part of me wanted to burn it. Another part, quieter, more dangerous, wanted answers. I read it at midnight, with the lights low and my tea long gone cold. Alara. Asterisk, there are no words I can write that will undo what I've done. I know that. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not sure I'd forgive me either, asterisk. Asterisk, I've watched your testimony, on the courtroom video they gave me here. I saw you speak, steady as ever, spine straight even when you were still in that chair. It gutted me, asterisk. Asterisk, because I remember that strength. I used to be proud of it. Before I grew afraid of it. Asterisk. I paused. Afraid? Of me? He had never seemed afraid of anything. Asterisk, you always made things look effortless. The way you built your career, your foundation, your reputation. I used to tell people how brilliant you were, how lucky I was to be your husband. And I meant it. But somewhere along the way, I started hating that I was the lucky one. Asterisk. Asterisk, you remember that winter in Banff? You'd just gotten published in the Journal of Neuroscience. I brought champagne to the cabin, pretending I'd planned it. Truth is, I was drunk by the time I got there. I had been at a bar 2 towns over, telling some stranger how I felt like a footnote in my own marriage. Asterisk. I closed the letter halfway. There it was. Jealousy. Not love. Not anger. Not money. Jealousy had driven him to kill me. Or try to. And yet, he couldn't even do that right. I continued reading. Asterisk, Valerie wasn't meant to be anything more than a distraction. You were working 16-hour days. I wanted to feel important again. But she fed it. The envy. The resentment. She told me that you didn't need me anymore. That you wouldn't even notice if I left. Asterisk. Asterisk, and then, when you had the crash, I told myself it was fate. A reset. A chance to regain control. But I didn't realize until later, I wasn't trying to erase you. I was trying to erase the part of me that couldn't keep up with you. Asterisk. I stopped reading. This wasn't an apology. It was a confession, laced with ego and cowardice. But there was one paragraph left. Asterisk, I hope you rebuild everything. I hope your foundation becomes the lighthouse for others. You've always been better than me. I see that now. I just wish I'd seen it before I became someone you had to survive. Asterisk. N. No signature. Just the initial, like he couldn't bear to write his name anymore. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer with the rest of the evidence, what I called my silent archive. Not because I needed it for court. That chapter was over. But because every scar deserves a name. And I would not forget the name of mine. I returned to work the next morning with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Something had shifted. Not in grief. But in gravity. I was no longer angry. I was done letting him own even a thread of my emotion. From that day forward, his name would no longer define me in meetings, press interviews, or the legacy I was building. When people mentioned him, I would say, "That was the man who underestimated silence." And then I'd smile. Because he thought I wouldn't hear. He thought I wouldn't rise. And now I was the one writing the final chapters. Her name was Amira. 17 years old. A dancer. A scholarship student from a town no one could pronounce unless they'd lived there. A hit and run left her in a coma, 1 fractured leg, 3 broken ribs, and a cerebral contusion that should have taken everything. But it didn't. Because when I stood at the foot of her bed and saw the delicate rise and fall of her chest, the flutter of her lashes beneath closed lids, I saw myself. Not in the medical charts. Not in the stats. But in the in-between. The place between awareness and silence. The place where people forget you're still fighting. Her mother sat in the corner of the room, cradling a pair of point shoes in her lap. Her hands trembled. Her lips barely moved when she spoke. "They said it's too soon to hope," she whispered. I crouched beside her, my knees stiff from the cold air and old memories. "It's never too soon to speak to her," I said. "She may not answer with words, but that doesn't mean she can't hear you." She looked up, startled. And I saw it, the need to believe. That evening, I returned alone. Not as a neurologist. Not as the founder. But as someone who had once been trapped in a body everyone assumed was empty. I pulled a chair close, leaned forward, and whispered. "Hi, Amira. I don't know if you can hear me yet, but I'm going to talk like you can. Because I believe you can." I told her about the first time I felt movement return to my finger. How it terrified me, because it meant the game had changed. I told her how silence could be a battleground, how sometimes the only way to scream was to listen. I visited every night after that. Sometimes I read. Sometimes I sat in stillness. Sometimes I just breathed next to her, letting the rhythm remind her that bodies remember even when brains falter. Then one night, it happened. The nurse on duty called me in a rush. She blinked, she said, breathless. "Dr. Quinn," she blinked twice. Intentionally. I raced down the hallway, coat half buttoned, tea forgotten in my office. And there she was. Eyes still closed. But brows twitching. I leaned close. "Amira," I whispered. "If you're with me, try again." She blinked. Once. Twice. Deliberate. Like thunder cracking along, dry sky. I felt the pressure of tears in my throat. Not because I was amazed. But because I remembered. I remembered how a blink wasn't just a signal. It was a revolution. It meant, asterisk, I'm here. I'm not gone. Don't forget me, asterisk. The team moved fast after that. Therapy. Cognitive tests. A plan. Her brain had waited in quiet. But it was ready. And so was she. Weeks passed. And I watched Amira sit up for the first time. Her mother wept openly, holding the shoes in her lap again, but this time, with hope. "Will she dance again?" the mother asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But she'll stand again. That much I know." Later, Amira wrote me a letter with her own trembling hand. Asterisk, "Dr. Quinn, they thought I was gone. But I wasn't. I was waiting. Like you did. Thank you for reminding me that stillness is not surrender." Asterisk. I kept that letter. Framed it in my office. Because it reminded me of the truth I'd almost forgotten. That survival isn't only about defeating the ones who hurt you. It's about becoming a hand that pulls someone else from the quiet. One blink at a time. It's strange how quiet becomes familiar. In the early days of my coma, silence was suffocating. It pressed against me like water, heavy and infinite, a sea without surface. But now that I've survived, rebuilt, and stood in courtrooms, boardrooms, and hospital corridors, I realized something unexpected. That silence saved me. Not because I was hidden in it, but because I learned to hear in it. I didn't just hear Nathaniel's voice in that hospital room. I heard the echoes of everything I once overlooked, the way his tone shifted when he lied, the tremor in Valerie's laugh, the tension beneath every gentle brush of his hand on mine. I heard myself too, my own disbelief, my refusal to accept betrayal, my quiet decision to fight without moving. Silence stripped away the noise of performance. What remained was truth. And that truth, it became my scalpel. It let me carve my way out. Now, 1 year after the verdict, the world is louder than ever. Phones buzz. Cameras flash. Emails stream in like a tide that never sleeps. The foundation has grown faster than I imagined. We've launched initiatives in 6 countries. Trained over 2,000 hospital advocates. Protected hundreds of patients whose voices might have otherwise been lost in the static of bureaucracy. But I still make space for quiet. Every morning at 5 a.m., I sit on my apartment balcony before the city wakes. I drink coffee. I listen to the silence, not because I'm afraid of the noise, but because I respect what stillness can teach. Last week, I visited the hospital where I almost died. Not for a conference. Not for work. Just to walk the halls. The staff greeted me like I was a legend. But I wasn't there to bask. I was there to see, to remember. I stepped into the same private suite where I lay immobile for 3 months. The bed was freshly made. The 4-line hung unused. A nurse passed behind me and said gently, "We call this the Quinn room now. The place where hope doesn't go silent." I smiled, but I didn't speak. Some things are better felt in the chest than heard in the air. Later that day, I stopped by the library where my father used to read while I studied medicine. The same place I had once revised my first journal article on coma recovery. I donated a new collection of books, volumes on medical ethics, trauma-informed care, and a thin, black-bound memoir. The librarian raised an eyebrow. "You wrote this?" I nodded. She opened the cover and read the title. "The Silence That Saved Me." "I thought you'd call it something louder," she said, smiling. But I shook my head. Loud was how Nathaniel lived. Loud was how he lied. But silence. Silence was where I saw. Where I waited. Where I won. I left the library that evening and walked into a dusk bathed in gold. Seattle's skyline glimmered across the water like it had been dusted with forgiveness. I breathed in, not to brace, not to fight, but to simply be. My name was once whispered beside a deathbed. Now, it is spoken beside legislation, medical reform, and new patient rights laws. Alara Quinn, once a neurologist, now a survivor, an advocate, a voice for those trapped beneath their own stillness. I did not win because I was the loudest. I won because I listened longer than they thought I could. Because I knew that silence was never weakness. It was the sound of strength gathering. The sound of justice being born. And the only thing louder than that is survival.